morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. My name is Prasanna, and I represent the George Institute for Global Health, where we work with the various speakers, and we are part of the larger RISE consortium. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the macro issues when it comes to exercising power, and in that sense, I thought I present some of the findings we have had with the various workers that we have engaged with in India in 4 cities. So I'll just share my slides. And so this is in the larger context of the RISE consortium. So I have named it as participation, accountability, and power in neoliberal times. And what is the effect of neoliberalism on all of these? I mean, the macro effect of neoliberal governance on participation, accountability, and power. So let me run through the slides. So social accountability is based on the 3 pillars. That is of voice, answerability, and enforceability. So the idea is that the citizenry will have a voice, which will then demand answers, and therefore also have an enforceability component into it. So the whole premise is based on the participation of citizens, and participation as one of the basics for social accountability. So at the same time, we also know about participation. Yeah, participation is seen as a voice of the poor to exercise their agency. There have been also renewed calls to have deeper participation also from the democratic angle, deepening democracy and other things. And at the same time, also thinking that deeper participation will have more accountable governments. So what is termed as public or democratic. Public accountability is a subset of the democratic accountability. Participation is also tagged to the human and citizenship, right? So we come to the citizenship angle a little while later as to why that is put under quotes. So participation is not only seen as a means of having voice, but also having as to have an active participation in the public space, or public sphere, and also influencing the policy spaces. What Cornwall and Barrett told, that you move from being users and choosers to makers and shapers. So I think that's the basis for which participation is thought of. That it will increase the agency, it will demand accountability, it will have better, it will amplify the voices of the people, which makes enforceability and answerability, which enhances those. So participatory action research, on the other hand, is rooted, again, taking off from the philosophy of Freire, of raising of critical consciousness of communities and thereby their agency being enhanced. So all of them talking about participation and how participation increases agency. Then this agency sought to change the power balance. So we are talking about power here during this panel, and so in that sense, participatory action research has implications for power, and then also to give the power to the people to hold governments accountable. So these are the basics on which are rooted the whole idea of participatory action research. Yeah, so but we are in an increasingly neoliberalized world, and neoliberalization came up because of the perceived failure of Keynesianism of the 1980s. So it was a failure, and the welfare state was considered inefficient. So they needed to bring in the private market mechanisms to deliver public services. So typical prescriptions were free markets, deregulation, privatization, lower taxes, reduced government spending, and contractualization and informalization of labor. Basically, it is about removing the government, have a laissez-faire government, which is only there to steer and not row. That's the phrase. So the government should just merely steer and not row, in the sense of governments have no business to be in business. So this resulted in the rollback of governments. Of course, there are also global governance matters in which the globalization affected the way the governments could have the policy space, as it is called, to take measures for the welfare of its population. So the rollback of governments undermined traditional forms of accountability. So we earlier had this arrangement that the governments would be there, the governments would be answerable, accountable for the larger people who have voted for them, and so there's a democratic accountability set up. But the neoliberal regimes have been resulting and has resulted in the rollback of the governments. So the movement hence became from government to governance. So then again, it's all journalistic, but yeah. So the idea is that you move from being government centered to governance centered. So also neoliberalism creates what is called as centralized decentralization, where the state is seeking to control outcomes through contractual processes. So once the state has withdrawn, so then it has to manage it through contracts, and as we have seen, one of the tenets of neoliberalism is contractualization. So through contractual processes, you are trying to ensure public services are delivered, and hence not necessarily directly dealing with people. So finally, you also have what is called as network governance, which is another hallmark, and which has resulted in multiple modes of accountability, but no single point of responsibility. So in the network governance structure, it is all devolved, not in the real political sense, but not as local participatory governances, but more and more devolution to multiple layers, and then hence calling for a network governance, which then creates problems as to where accountability lies, because there's no single point of responsibility. So just to come to the context, so in India, an estimated, we work with waste workers. As I mentioned earlier, in India, an estimated 1.5 million workers are engaged in waste work, and majority of the waste workers are in the informal sector. The waste supply chain has both formal and informal sectors. The formal is the standard municipal sanitation workers and what are called as door-to-door garbage collectors. The informal sector is a continuous chain. There's a spectrum of informal sector waste workers. One is the itinerant buyers who go house to house collecting the recyclables. They would take typically a tricycle or a two-wheeler or a modified two-wheeler or something, and then go around house to house to collect the recyclables. Then we have the street side waste pickers. Typically, if you see the second photograph in this of Guntur Vijayawada, so somebody is covering the streets for recyclables and then collecting it, and then they sell it to the scrap dealers to get some money for that day. And then we also have dump yards, wherein people live at the dump yards, communities live at the dump yards, and the tippers come and then put the waste collected from the cities, and then these families who live at the dump yards then collect the recyclables. So the George Institute is working with partners in 4 cities of India: Shimla, which is a mountainous region, which is in the Himalayas, Guntur and Vijayawada, and Bangalore, which is the metropolitan city. Yeah, so there are layers of informality created due to neoliberal governance. One is, if you see the layers of informality, you have informal waste workers who collect over 80% of the recyclable waste. So in some sense, it is resulting in considerable savings for the government. So in a way, the perverted logic, the informal subsidizes the formal. But the neoliberal governance is also about more and more contractual, informal arrangements, either in the name of better efficiency, new public management, and those sorts of things. And during our work with the waste workers, we have uncovered multiple layers of informalization. And as usual, because of the informalization and contractualization largely. It insulates the governments from accountability seeking mechanisms. Yeah, sorry, this is the busy slide. I did not want to put in animation. So there are layers and layers of informality. For example, waste pickers who live near dumping yard, they collect the recyclables, as I mentioned earlier, from the mixed waste collected and dumped by the tippers. This also is being further, I mean, those communities are further being marginalized by urban local bodies going for waste to energy plants, where the private waste to energy plants take over these dumping yards. Despite the evidence that the waste to energy plants have been a large failure, because in India, the waste is not segregated at source, or mixed waste, both wet and dry waste are mixed, and they have very low calorific value. Despite that, there is a uncritical romance with some of these waste to energy plants by urban local bodies, and so city after city is busy establishing waste to energy plants and subsidizing them as well, which results in the waste pickers' access to even these recyclables put in danger. And then waste pickers are scouring the streets to collect recyclables. You saw some of the photographs lying around in the city. Again, they have no access to housing, social security, sanitation facilities. So there are no public sanitation toilet facilities. So the waste pickers typically go around for about 9 hours in a day, collect waste recyclables, sell it to the scrap dealer, and then thereby it gets sold and they get the money. These livelihoods again are endangered by ULBs now opting for door-to-door garbage collection, because the idea is that if you, for example, in Shimla, you have a huge problem of monkeys and dogs. So there is a thinking that if the waste is put in public places, also the notion of clean cities, so the monkeys could come and disrupt and then sprawl the waste around. So they have opted for what is called as door-to-door garbage collection, which means that the waste pickers who are scouring the streets cannot collect recyclables anymore, and it's drastically reduced. So in Guntur, another next layer of informalization, the ULB contracted out door-to-door garbage collection to a non-profit organization. So even though one would think that this is moving towards formalization, it's actually that the waste picker workers were not having any access to social security benefits that they would have had if they were to be formally employed by the municipal corporation or local bodies. Shimla is a classic case of multiple layers of informalization actively pursued by the urban local body. For example, in Shimla, the urban local body hived off a society called as Shimla Environmental Heritage Conservation and Beautification Society. The name sounds very romantic, but what it meant was it was a society, private society set up by the urban local body. So it was a what do you call it, hived off society to engage waste workers informally for door-to-door garbage collection. So the door-to-door garbage collectors would do the work of municipal corporation, but would not be having the social security benefits or that would accrue to a municipal sanitation worker. It operates as a private society, and the irony is that the municipal commissioner, the bureaucrat, is the chairperson of the society. So here you have a typical what we call a Congo, government ordained non-government organization. And the bylaws of the society explicitly bans the workers from becoming the formal tenured employees. Still, these people are a little better off if they would get some increments after hard-fought increments, and some medical benefits are provided to these workers. Then we come to the next category of workers. In the same municipal corporation, there are contractual workers. So they have been working for 5 years on a daily wage basis, and one more layer of informalization is that the Shimla urban local body outsourced the door-to-door garbage collection to a contractor who would hire people from outside the state and bring them to work. Even though the model has not been successful, there's no evidence because of the mountainous terrain, the other plain area people cannot actually work in this city, but even then the Shimla Municipal Corporation keeps dabbling with these modalities. And so some of the facilities that were available for say workers, for example, an increment or medical benefit, even those are denied to these categories based workers. In Bangalore, it's another interesting phenomena. Migrant families from Bengal, mostly from minority communities, work for an owner who is a sort of a scrap dealer. So the owner takes up a large private land on rent for sorting, for collecting the waste, and then segregating, and also recycling, and those sorts of things. And the ownership of the land also is sometimes not legitimate. So who is the owner ultimately? Nobody would be able to trace. That's the sort of scenario. And then the waste workers' families live in temporary shacks. The owner is the provider of all the services, water, electricity, even arranging healthcare, mostly through a private provider. And the migrant families live in constant fear of police repression due to xenophobia and religious intolerance, and hence would not want to be visible. So this is a large canvas of providing the layers of informality that we have seen while we were working with the waste workers. So what does it mean for us in terms of voice, in terms of agency, in terms of power, in terms of accountability? Is a very, very, these are very pertinent questions to be asked. So the whole premise of PR is that participation through collectivization raises critical consciousness, which would give power to demand accountability. But here are migrant workers from minority communities who would want to be under the radar rather than raising their voices, lest they be attracting trouble in the larger xenophobic and religious fundamentalist scenarios. So the migrant workers would not want to be visible. So the whole idea of participation is that it will increase the voices and the visibility and all. And here is a section of people who do not want to be seen there, lest they be arrested or their livelihoods taken away. And many of the waste workers also lack the documentation needed. Like for example, in Shimla, many of the workers come from the neighboring countries, so they wouldn't have something like a citizenship. But the whole idea of accountability, the whole idea of political accountability is based on citizenship rights, and who is a citizen. And that's why in the beginning itself, I put that under quotes as citizen in under quotes, because who is a citizen? Is it by nationality? And in the increased nationalist scenarios around the world, how could anybody demand or raise their voice for better accountabilities on the market? So, and added to this is the larger absence of state in the lives of these workers. One is the silence in the government policies. The government policies do not recognize these kind of workers due to the layers of informality, of course. And so that increases the distance of the state from these people and its obligations. Another is the usurious relationship, as we saw in Bangalore, in which the worker is under a usurious relationship with the scrap dealer, who is the immediate provider. So, and workers living almost like bondage. So, a typical focus happened when COVID pandemic happened and the whole nation was locked down. They suffered livelihood because they couldn't go the streets. Neither was they were completely cut off. So the only relief came from this in the form of a support from civil society organizations, where the state tried to provide some relief. It was only for people who had certain documentation, for example, a ration card. And interestingly, it's a vicious cycle. For having a ration card, you need proper address. And the biggest demand of these waste workers, and we have done prioritization now, has been around the issue of housing. So they don't have house, so they won't get ration card. They don't have ration cards, so they won't get relief. So the only relief happened in the form of civil society organizations. So again, civil society organizations not as demand raisers or voice givers, but only as relief providers to these categories of people. So, in the larger macro context of neoliberal and informal environments, what does it mean to demand accountability? And what does it mean to raise the voice of the people? And what does it mean to give agency up to the people and power to the people? It's a larger question that we need to. Thank you.